Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have you all here in person today. I'm Jenny Harris, a COSI Curatorial Research Fellow in Modern and Contemporary Art here at the Art Institute, and I'm thrilled you are joining us to hear from the museum's curators and conservators who will be sharing the exciting discoveries they made while conducting research for the exhibition, Salvador Dalí, The Image Disappears. As we begin, a brief reminder to please silence your mobile devices. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Caitlin Haskell, Jennifer Cohen, Allison Langley, and Katrina Rush. Caitlin Haskell is the Gary C. and Francis Comer Curator in Modern and Contemporary Art and Director of Ray Johnson Collections and Research. She holds a PhD in art history from the University of Texas at Austin. A scholar of 20th century painting and sculpture, her exhibitions and publications have addressed the production and critical reception of modern art in Europe and the Americas. Between 2012 and 2018, Caitlin worked as assistant and associate curator at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, where she organized exhibitions on Alexander Calder, Edvard Munch, and René Magritte. Since joining the Art Institute in March 2018, she has co-curated the exhibitions Ray Johnson, Care Of, with Jordan Carter, and the retrospective Cézanne with the Art Institute's Gloria Groom, and Achim Borhardt-Hume and Natalia Sidlina of Tate Modern. She is currently co-organizing with Terry Ark an exhibition on the art of Remedios Varo that will open at the Art Institute this summer. Along with Jennifer Cohen, she is the co-curator of Salvador Dalí, The Image Disappears. Jennifer Cohen is curator of provenance and research at the Art Institute of Chicago. She holds a PhD in art history from the University of Chicago and an MA in textiles and apparel from Cornell University. At the Art Institute, Jennifer has also worked as a research associate in modern and contemporary art and a Mellon Cosi Curatorial Research Fellow in photography. In these roles, she contributed to the exhibitions Magritte, The Mystery of the Ordinary, 1926 to 1938, Alfred Stieglitz in the 19th Century, and Ray Johnson, Care Of. In conjunction with the Ray Johnson exhibition, she organized the companion exhibition, Care Of, Tender Buttons. Allison Langley is Director of Paintings and Frames Conservation at the Art Institute of Chicago. Since she joined the museum in 2002, her treatments and research projects have focused primarily on modern paintings, and she has published and lectured on the art of René Magritte, Amedeo Modigliani, Pablo Picasso, and Mark Rothko, among others. Prior to arriving in Chicago, Allison worked for 3 years as the William R. Leisher Fellow for Research and Treatment of Modern Paintings at the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. She holds a master's diploma in the conservation of easel paintings from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London and a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of Texas at Austin. Katrina Rush is a paintings conservator at the Art Institute of Chicago, where she cares for work in the modern and contemporary art collection. She has worked and trained in the field for more than 17 years, developing diverse treatment techniques for paintings. She holds degrees in studio art and chemistry, as well as an MA and a certificate of advanced study in art conservation. Katrina has coordinated 2 international symposia related to technical research on artist materials and methods, and has published multiple scholarly papers, including studies of the works by Giorgio de Chirico, René Magritte, and Henri Rousseau. She continually seeks new ways to present research, and she believes this is to be an essential part of conservation. Thank you again for being here today. Now please join me in welcoming our illustrious speakers to the stage.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jenny, for that really lovely introduction. It's really great to see everyone here with us spending Saturday afternoon together. We're really pleased to see you. And, I feel like a rainy Saturday is the perfect time to be talking about modern art among friends. So, and we really are in for a treat today. We have the great pleasure of sharing with you a program conceived around a single painting by Salvador Dalí, very large-scale work that was at the heart of a collaborative discovery, actually almost exactly a year ago. So for the next 40 minutes or so, you'll be hearing from the 4 of us. Our talks will go outward from this painting and also attend closely to its surface. We'll be using the podium as we go forward, so there will be 3 focus talks, but I'm going to get us started with some remarks right now, setting things up, and then after the talks, we'll return to our chairs for a very robust Q&A. So, as you heard in the introduction, the 4 of us are Art Institute staff members. And as much as we love creating exhibitions that draw upon loans from around the world, as we've done in Salvador Dalí, The Image Disappears, which has the benefit of actually fantastic loans from 9 different lenders, we also really love to research the Art Institute's own holdings. There's a particular type of collaborative research that you can really only do in a setting like the Art Institute. You need a library, but you can't do it exclusively in a library. You need a very strong conservation lab, but you can't do it exclusively in a conservation lab. And it really takes these sort of complementary disciplines and intelligences and resources that we have in a museum to do the type of research that we're going to be talking about. We all, the 4 of us, really love it a lot. So. One of the motivating factors of organizing a Dalí show was actually to be able to conduct this type of research on the museum's really extensive holdings of Dalí, and to make the time and space so that we could focus on him together. And there are close to 40 works on view from Art Institute collections in the exhibition. These are works that were really very carefully selected and generously loaned to the exhibition from the departments of Modern and Contemporary Art, Prints and Drawings, Research Center, Special Collections, Photography and Media Art. And every object from the Art Institute's holding in one way or another was the subject of research. But one of the works on our checklist started out pretty problematically, to be honest with you. This is the work that was keeping us up at night. And I mean, thank goodness we don't encounter this very often, but we really had this sinking feeling of not really knowing entirely what we had on our hands with this picture. So yes, the work was included in the catalog Raisonné of paintings that is produced and published by the Gala Salvador Dalí Foundation. Yes, the work was very familiar to scholars. It had been on view quite regularly over the previous 35 years that it had been at the museum. But from a curatorial and art historical perspective, we weren't entirely convinced that we understood the circumstances that would lead to the making of a work like this. Or to put it more simply, we didn't understand why this work looked the way it did in terms of its large scale, in terms of its loose brushwork, and some other things that we're going to be talking about. And so when we pressed on these questions, neither the published literature nor our own object files that we keep had much light to shed. Simultaneously, from a conservation perspective, Allison and Katrina knew that the surface of the work was not right, in the sense that there had been subsequent hands that had worked on the painting after Dalí. And then as their research continued on paintings of the 1930s, they could point to more and more aspects of this work that made it different from other pictures that Dalí was producing at this point in time in his career. So you can read all about the questions that we had and how they were ultimately answered in CNN Style, in the Art Institute's member magazine, in the Smithsonian magazine, in our exhibition texts in the show. The story, like the exhibition itself, has really been very popular. But the most compressed way of telling the story is this. On March 18th, 2022, the team that you see here pieced together a puzzle that allows us to place the painting, now called Untitled Dream of Venus from 1939, into the context of the Dream of Venus Pavilion that Dalí produced for the 1939 New York World's Fair. This was Dalí's last project in the United States in the 1930s. And due to this, we can also connect this painting with this mural. The other panels that you see here are in the collection of the Hiroshima Prefectural Museum in Japan. And you can see all of those works together as a continuous image as installed inside the Dream of Venus Pavilion and documented by the photographer Eric Schall. So today in our presentations, we are going to be going deeper into this discovery, looking back at our research process, and also forward to what this finding means for our understanding of the painting, but also, perhaps how it resets some of our understandings of who Dalí was in the decade of the 1930s. Katrina Rush will start us off by speaking about Dalí's paintings of the 30s. She'll be helping us to look closely at how Dalí made several of the works that you see in the exhibition in the first two galleries of the show. This will lay a foundation for understanding technical aspects of Dalí's paranoid critical painting, and you'll be able to see how the Dream of Venus painting really differs from them. Allison will then be speaking to us about treating the surface of this work. Her talk will kind of give us a before and after of the painting from a material and sort of a physical standpoint. And then Jen Cohen is going to give us what we might think of as a before and after from an interpretive standpoint. What are we to make of this painting now that we know that it was not created as a standalone composition? And how does meaning shift when we no longer regard this work as visions of eternity from 1936 and start to understand it instead as part of the larger Dream of Venus project? So before handing things off to Katrina, I will offer just a few additional words sort of setting us up and building upon the materials that we have in the exhibition galleries. So going beyond simply the new title and the new date for the painting that we'll be talking about, the discoveries under discussion today situates the painting in several new contexts. For one, there's the context of the amusement zone of the 1939 New York World's Fair. And attendant to that is a particular cast of characters. So in our exhibition, we represent that with the photographs by Dalí's New York gallerist, Julian Levy. You see several of those photographs on the screen here. Levy took these images, and one of those images, actually the photograph in the middle, the man in the suit there, that is Edward James, one of Dalí's most important patrons, also a great patron of René Magritte. And we also show some of the performers in the pavilion, these living liquid ladies who you also see, that's in quotation marks there, such as Betty Kuzmek, Kelsey Carr, Eileen Mitchell, and Mary Spence Francis. So they were employed to work as sirens, sort of beckoning visitors into the grotto-like pavilion. And then within the pavilion, they were employed as mermaids who swam in an aquatic environment designed by Dalí and actually wore costumes that were designed by him also. And we also include in the exhibition references to the organizers of the World's Fair, who were dubbed by Dalí as the middlemen of culture. And it was no wonder that Dalí and bureaucracy would clash, but certainly it is fascinating that Dalí entered into a business venture with these very straight-laced sort of organizers of the fair and formed the corporation that was known as Dalí World's Fair, or DWF. It was actually Julian Levy who had the idea and first proposed a surrealist attraction in the amusement zone of the New York World's Fair. His idea was to create what he called a surrealist walkthrough, a display that would be kind of a hybrid of surrealist exhibition design and sort of importing that into an American popular cultural context. So he was very interested in this idea of avant-garde surrealist exhibitions such as those that were being done in Paris in 1938, and taking that type of display and melding it with something that would be understandable broadly to an American context, like a funhouse or maybe even a burlesque show in some ways. Initially, Levy pitched the Surrealist Pavilion that would have contributions from several contributors. So not only Dalí, but also Max Ernst, Marcel Duchamp, René Magritte, and Yves Tanguy were intended to be contributors. And as you can see here, this Surrealist house was going to have the shape of an eye, the great Surrealist symbol. And it would have this projection of colored light beaming out through the iris. But then, it became clear that there were some financial responsibilities, and the only name that would be able to create the draw that would fund the Surrealist walkthrough was Salvador Dalí, and it became his project alone. So for his work on the Pavilion, Dalí was paid $2,500, and his contract also stated that he would get 20% of the profits, primarily from paid admission. There was a charge of 25 cents a head, and you would actually walk past that fish head that you see there that kind of looks like a little booth. You would pay your toll there and walk into the Pavilion. And in exchange for that, he would create the pavilion's facade, which you see here, the interior designs, the costumes, the incidental scenery, and the souvenirs. Initially, the space was going to be called Bottoms of the Sea, pun intended. But then they decided upon the slightly sort of more wholesome Dalí's Dream of Venus. And we have a very brief video to share with you that will sort of show what people would have seen and experienced at the fair. But one thing is for sure, they would not have seen Dalí. He and Gala actually left the day before of the press preview, totally frustrated by the middlemen of culture, and they left everything in the hands of Julian Levy and Edward James. They had created this spectacle, and then they left. They disappeared. So we're going to watch a little bit, about 40 seconds of amateur footage from the fair, and then Katrina will start us off with our first talk. You can see one of the sirens there, waving people in. And then the large-scale Venus from Botticelli's Birth of Venus. And then there's additional footage. You can find this online if you care to see these new vistas that Dalí's surrealist swimsuits opened up. So, okay, here you go.
Thank you, Caitlin. So from a young age, Dalí held an almost obsessive admiration for old master paintings, ranging from Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, to Velázquez and Vermeer, particularly Vermeer, whose delicate and precisely painted portraits displayed strokes of color and details that Dalí revered. So much so that Dalí is known to have said that he would cut off his left hand if he could just observe Vermeer at his easel for 10 minutes, or how he might cut off both of his ears should Vermeer reveal to him some of the secrets of his material and techniques. With this in mind, we set out to understand how Dalí made his paintings, and in particular asking ourselves the questions, did he paint like the old masters that he loved? There we go. The Art Institute owns 5 paintings by the artist, paintings of the 1930s created during a time that corresponds with Dalí's first decade of exposure to U.S. audiences, and as Caitlin mentioned, are the conceptual core to the exhibition. In preparation for this show, I worked with a team of paintings conservators and conservation scientists to undertake the examination and analysis of all 5 of these works in order to better understand them in new ways. We were aided by colleagues from numerous departments, which involved careful transport and unframing, capturing various modes of imaging, pigment mapping and analysis, sampling, X-radiography, and also careful microscopic examination. For my portion of the talk today, I will actually focus on what we found in the 4 smaller paintings to give better context to the discovery. Portrait of Gala with 2 lamb chops in equilibrium upon her shoulder was painted in 1934 and is in India ink and pencil executed on a painted olive wood block. The picture plane on this small portrait is less than 3 inches by 4 inches in size, and the block itself is around 3/4 inches thick, making this little treasure very object-like. Close examination reveals pencil lines and small granular marks, in addition to the India ink portion painted on top. Old master painters would sometimes use a cartoon or a preparatory drawing to transfer drawing to an image's surface before painting. Likewise, Dalí transferred images to many of his works before painting. Dalí, however, had a fascination with photography and postcards, and he collected this material throughout his lifetime, often using it as source material for his paintings. We knew that our portrait of Gala was created from this 1933 photograph of him and his wife lounging together on the beach. Although still contemplating the exact method of transfer, it was likely traced and reversed. When this image is overlaid, the reverse of the photograph, the contours align perfectly with the solid pencil lines, and the shadows are denoted by small staccato-type marks applied by the artist. You may have also noticed that there are actually two small portraits of Gala in the exhibition. Because of our relationship with the Dalí Foundation, we were granted permission to examine their painting as well, and we'll be collaborating with them on ongoing research. Aside from the obvious differences in oil paint and India ink, the portraits display other differences, such as the inclusion of a signature on the Art Institute's piece, the number of pearls in Gala's necklace, the number of buttons behind Gala, and details in the background of the foundation's image. Infrared imaging of the Dalí Foundation portrait also revealed the same pencil underdrawings beneath the paint, which align with both the photograph and the drawing in our painting. Both versions of the portrait were also painted on olive wood. Dalí called Gala his little olive because of her olive-colored skin. In his book, 50 Secrets of the Magic Craftsman, Dalí wrote how he contemplated using olive oil to paint her, but owing to the fact that olive oil would take too long to dry, and he knew this would be a really poor medium for painting, he chose not to. But perhaps this is why he used olive wood instead for the support. As part of our study, I also completed X-radiography of both of these paintings, which, while they were so finely painted, didn't reveal anything about the paint structure, did show nice detail of the wood grain in each, which I believe are similar enough in their unique pattern to have been cut from the same piece of wood prior to Dalí painting. The next painting in the Art Institute's collection is a small, untitled desert landscape painting, painted around 1933. This work was also painted on panel and at approximately 6 inches by 7 inches in size is smaller than a typical sheet of paper. Dalí painted many small paintings with miniaturist detail throughout his career, utilizing the finest sable brushes and at times a magnifying glass to exact placement of strokes of color. Magnified details of our painting, Untitled Desert Landscape, give you a sense of this. Individual strokes of paint were carefully placed with the tip of a tiny brush, often akin to the precisely painted strokes in an old master painting. This attention to detail carries through to the Art Institute of Chicago's painting titled Inventions of the Monsters, painted in 1937. Here, strokes of yellow create highlights on the hourglass, mimicking a dark-to-light approach applied by Vermeer and other old master painters. But also in this painting, we begin to see something a little different. In Dalí's baguette, for example, the bread was painted with gray for the highlights, but on close inspection, you can discern that it is in fact the background gray color used on the tablecloth that creates the gray on the bread, as if the detail was painted in reverse. In examining other paintings during installation of the exhibition, I realized this technique of leaving background colors in reserve within object is visible throughout Dalí's work. Ongoing analysis of pigment mapping and hyperspectral imaging performed by Giovanni Veri, one of our Art Institute conservation scientists, has also helped us to decipher Dalí's pigments in his works. For Inventions of the Monsters, we began to see isolated use of certain pigments, such as cobalt blue in the angel wings, vermilion red in the box, and cadmium yellow in the flames of the giraffe. This type of pigment analysis has also helped us contemplate the nearly invisible blue dog in the lower right corner of the painting, shown here under ultraviolet radiation for enhanced visibility. One of the questions that's been posed to us over and over is whether or not the dog was intended to disappear, or if rather it was degradation of the pigments or the oil paint that caused it to fade away. We can now nearly conclude from recent analysis that the pigments used in the dog are likely cobalt or a form of cerulean blue, both pigments which are not known to degrade quickly. And Dalí knew this also. Dalí wrote describing cobalt blue as a color which is very permanent and mixes well with lead white, and quote, how several shades exist and the deepest are the most stable, end quote. Additionally, while we can expect oil paint to become more transparent over time as it ages, archival images of the painting displayed at MoMA in 1941 just 4 years after the work was painted, and images of the corresponding catalog revealed that the dog was likely already a visage, even at this point, and it seemed plausible that Dalí had just painted it that way. This isolated use of a wide variety of pigments was also a trait in chemists lifting with extreme precaution the cuticle of a grand piano from 1936. But the bigger story here, of course, is that of a ghostly figure on the painting's surface. We've long known from X-radiography of the painting that there was something beneath the paint, is in this image, where you can see figures from the current image held in reserve, as well as a fourth figure not included in the painting. It wasn't until I was examining an infrared image of the painting that we began to understand exactly who was lurking beneath the paint. At first, I thought this thin pencil underdrawing beneath the surface may be the author of the first Surrealist manifesto, André Breton, an important figure in Surrealism. And this seemed to make a little sense, as the painting was also painted in 1936, around the time when there was some contention between Dalí and Breton, and maybe explaining why the figure was painted out. However, during our investigation of the work, Jen recalled a reference to an article written by Charles Stuckey indicating that the painting was previously titled Instantaneous Presence of Ludwig II of Bavaria, Salvador Dalí, Lenin, and Wagner on a beach at Rosa. And for this reason, Stuckey believed that Dalí had painted out an image of Ludwig of Bavaria, or the Mad King, from this work, which, as it turns out, does correspond nicely with the underdrawings that we were able to visualize beneath the paint. In fact, this would not be the only time that Dalí would associate with Ludwig II of Bavaria. The Dalí Foundation provided us with this image of a room called Gala's dressing room, and in it pointed out that Dalí had kept a postcard of the Mad King. Additionally, shown here in a later 1938 drawing, is in which Dalí collaged an actual dust cover from the king's biography featuring his portrait. But what if before dismantling the dust cover, Dalí had somehow used this image to transfer, trace, or draw the underdrawing to our painting? When reversed and aligned, the infrared image captured from our painting and the book cover correspond nicely. The last piece of the puzzle was a cross-section taken by research conservator Kim Muir. This is a tiny sample of paint taken from a loss of paint, which can show the layer structure of a painting. What we learned is that Dalí never actually painted the Mad King, but rather transferred or drew the figure on the ground, where it was left in reserve, and then painted over it. Had the figure been painted in detail, we would have expected to see another layer of paint between the ground and the top coat. So, the ground layer being the white here and the top coat, and there's clearly not another layer of paint there. So while we may never know why Dalí did not actually paint the Mad King, when asked about this painting when it was first shown in Chicago in 1937, Dalí told a reporter, "It is impossible to ask for explanation. I tried to get the nearest to a certain thing as seen in a dream." And with that, I will hand you to Allison Langley, our Director of Paintings and Frames Conservation, to talk about the remarkable treatment of our Dream of Venus.
Thanks, Katrina. So compared to the other Dalí paintings in the AIC collection, the large canvas is an outlier due to its size and its surface appearance. As we now know, our 4-foot by 7-foot painting was just 1/6 of a much larger painting that measured nearly 20 feet wide and 8 feet tall. It's no surprise that Dalí approached the craft of painting very differently from the small detailed paintings from the 1930s. These slides of Dalí show him in the process of painting the large canvas in an off-site building where he worked on many of the props for the World's Fair Pavilion. The Chicago painting was part of the composition positioned to the left of the melting clocks, just cropped out of these photos, unfortunately. One can see the many buckets of paint and large brushes that Dalí used to paint the massive canvas. Due to the scale of the canvas, he had to approach the painting process differently. We see none of the delicate painting techniques used for the smaller paintings of the period. The palette was limited to a few basic pigments. XRF analysis found only white, black, blue, and yellow. There's no evidence of underdrawing on the painting or the use of reserves for the figures. Instead, Dalí seems to have loosely brushed in the compositional elements wet and wet in one quick campaign. This is apparent in the handling of the small striding figure, as well as the large black head form and the surrounding squiggles, which were painted directly on top of the background. Dalí painted in the black background first, then added thin layers of yellow and blue on top, rubbing into the upper paint layers to blend the colors and make the distinct gradation in the background. This rubbing resulted in an unusual, abraded and bumpy appearance. The beams were painted in on top of the black, with broad strokes of black and white paint mixed to make their gray surface. This happened on the surface while the paint was still wet. Once the large painting was completed off-site, it was moved into the World's Fair Pavilion, where it was nailed to one of the walls. Numerous props were placed in front of the painting, on the floor, and hanging from the ceiling. This movement and installation of the canvas was not a delicate operation. The painting retained signs of folding, rolling, abrasion, and general manhandling. The painted canvas was too tall for the space, so a portion at the top had to be folded over, and this led to cracking and loss through the head and figure of the Art Institute's portion of the mural. Nail holes and paint losses along the left edge of our painting resulted from the installation of the canvas directly to the wall. Now that we know the origin of the painting, these odd surface marks, which were uncovered during the recent treatment, make a lot more sense. Additionally, some circular paint marks in the lower right quadrant of the painting now reveal themselves to be early painted outlines for the edge of the clock's shadow on the neighboring section of the composition. The painting entered the museum's collection in 1987 with a thick varnish and a large amount of overpaint from an earlier restoration campaign. The varnish and overpaint had unified and smoothed out the surface, covering many of the idiosyncrasies. We had long-standing concerns about the appearance of the painting not being true to the artist's intentions due to the past restoration. But due to the popularity of the painting in the galleries and its large scale, we had not really had a chance to clean it and to study it. At the right, you see an annotated photo from the conservation files where we documented our concerns about the extensive overpaint and surface marks that marred the appearance over the course of several years. We also noted parallel horizontal cracks, indicating that the painting had been rolled at some point in the past. So last year, while we were preparing for the current Dalí exhibition, we decided that it was time to clean the painting with the hope of better understanding its original condition, its appearance, and its place in history. Here you see the ultraviolet or UV image on the right, which helps us visualize varnish and overpaint. For example, the dark forms in the sky to the right of the figure and the orange band on the horizon line are areas where the original paint was covered by layers and layers of extensive overpaint. We used infrared or IR photography to look beneath the paint to determine if the overpaint might be hiding large tears or damages not visible to the naked eye. In this case, we were able to determine that the original paint was in generally good condition, and it seems that the overpaint and varnish were likely used to add a polished or finished look to the rough, loosely painted surface, possibly to make it look more like a traditional Dalí easel painting. In these images, we did note a horizontal line near the top edge that we now know corresponds to the area of the painting that was once folded over. Here's the painting front and back. Prior to its entry into the collection, after the canvas was cut out of the large mural, it was glued to a second fabric support and attached to a wood stretcher to make it appear as an easel painting. The lining has kept the painting structurally stable and in plane all these years. So for the year-long cleaning treatment, the painting was taken out of its third floor modern wing gallery, which has housed it for many years, and it was unframed and placed on an easel in the painting's conservation studio for examination and cleaning. After many tests with solvent mixtures and study of the technical images, we dived into the treatment. Working from the edges inward, we were able to remove the varnish inch by inch with small cotton swabs. The varnish was glossy and quite discolored to a sort of yellowish gray. The discolored layer unnaturally flattened out the surface, drawing the viewer's attention to the surface texture. As it was removed, we could begin to see into the composition and regain a sense of depth in the landscape and to start to appreciate the true colors of the palette. Here you see some cleaning squares where the varnish and overpaint were removed to reveal a much lighter, more vivid and varied paint surface. In the cleaning test along the left edge, you can see the extensive cracking from rolling and handling, as well as the unfinished band of canvas along the left edge. In the slide on the right, we can see rubs and abrasions of the paint surface, likely due to the props leaning against and scraping the fresh paint layers. In the sky, the cleaning removed a very thick layer of blue-toned overpaint and varnish that hid the fold line, as well as related cracking and paint loss. In the image on the left, you can see the area partially cleaned, with the original paint on the left and the thick blue overpaint on the right. The extensive overpaint in the sky did not match the original blue paint, and the tone of the entire background shifted as this layer was removed. The original sky proved to be darker, and the gradations much more subtle and rich than we previously understood. After varnish and overpaint were removed, there were small cracks and damages in the sky along the fold line and scattered rubs and abrasions, requiring some in-painting. We were delighted to find that overall, the surface was in relatively good condition, despite the painting's unusual history. So little other work had to be done. At the end of the treatment, the painting was framed in a new simple black frame, which you see now in the exhibition. And I'm now going to turn you over to Jen Cohen, who will discuss the extensive research that led to this new understanding of the painting and discuss how we may place this new information about Dalí's Dream of Venus project into context going forward.
Thanks so much, Katrina or Allison, thanks. And Katrina, Caitlin as well. Thanks to all of you for working on this painting with me for the last several years. And thanks to our audience, too, for your interest in Dalí and in our collection. So I'd like to return to where Caitlin began, that moment when we found ourselves in the uniquely uncomfortable position of selecting this painting for an exhibition while not fully understanding it, either when or why it was made or technically what it depicted. So we see it here in the Modern Wing Galleries, pre-treatment in its previous frame alongside Dalí's Venus de Milo with drawers. It's easy to see how we might have interpreted this work very generally in a wall label, despite its uncharacteristic scale and format. So we see a barren, dreamlike landscape. Starting at the bottom, we see two boiled beans situated in the foreground, which Dalí occasionally used to provide a sort of culinary balance to his exploration of so-called meaty topics. We see a schematic classical arch, and we know that Dalí became increasingly interested in classicism toward the end of the 30s as he began to imagine how he might lead a sort of new Renaissance era in post-war Europe. Most prominently at the top left, we see a disintegrating figure, and this is nearly totally unique across his work, but you might imagine how we could use this to explore Dalí's approach to the wartime disintegration of Europe or the penetrating lens of psychoanalysis as a tool for surrealist artists. As one of the most beloved works in our museum and an icon of our collection of surrealist art, this work was always on our exhibition checklist. But as Caitlin mentioned, we had to acknowledge that we had numerous questions about it. And so while technical analysis and conservation began, we began our research, trusting that we would eventually get to a place where we could feel confident displaying it and describing it. So you can see in the set of comparative examples of Dalí's more schematic landscapes across his work of the 30s that we generated early on, we knew that we should likely be looking at his design and decorative work for clues. His fine art landscapes on the left, especially those in portrait or vertical format, were just generally much, much smaller. And I should note that the Hiroshima Dream of Venus panels came up for us immediately due to their scale, along with the screen here at the center of the slide from Dalí's patron, Edward James's collection. We looked to the library's special collections to
to consult the printed ephemera that were so important to Dalí's holistic practice and his self-construction as a celebrity during the 1930s. We can see that this material is an important part of Dalí's contribution to a street of mannequins that was installed as part of the International Surrealist exhibition in Paris during the year before the World's Fair exhibition in 1938. We found the first truly comparable image to our painting in the pages of Vogue in our library, in an advertisement for Dalí's World Fair Pavilion. So you can see a downcast linear figure carrying a bundle or butterfly net over their shoulder and casting a long shadow. It was definitely made by the same hand. This is what led us to photographs of the Pavilion project. And of course, we found it nestled into the dry portion of the pavilion, bringing us full circle to one of the first comparable images we identified. And now that we know the origin and context of this painting, we have the opportunity to rethink its significance. For one thing, we know for a fact that it was not a traditional easel painting, but in fact conceived as only one component of a three-dimensional environment. As part of the larger mural, we can now see more clearly that Dalí's intention was to assemble each of the most well-known images of his iconography of the 1930s, from the geological formations of northern Spain to his limp, soft clocks and lobsters and many more, the highlights of which I'd like to explore with you over the next few minutes. The most faithful and central citation is his large rendering of the persistence of memory, an iconic painting of 1931, which truly shaped Dalí's reception as an artist here in the United States. It was first displayed in an American museum here at the Art Institute in the Century of Progress exhibition in 1934, lent by Julian Levy and then promptly purchased by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And if you've seen it on view at MoMA, you know that it's one of Dalí's smaller compositions, and here Dalí made it larger than life to allow viewers to step into the dreamlike world he'd been creating over the decade. I also want to point out the lobster in the lower right corner, referring to what is sometimes called his aphrodisiac telephone, a culinary reference drawing on the idea that lobster stimulates the passions, which made the basic utilitarian black telephone suddenly very strange. Dalí had originally designed these telephones as part of his commission to design a surrealist environment in the home of Edward James. And as Caitlin mentioned, James served a really important organizing role in the pavilion's design and making. You can also see that the lobster is situated on a human figure containing drawers, much like our Venus de Milo with drawers sculpture of 1936, which incorporated actual functioning drawers. In fact, rare photographs of the 1939 exhibition at Julian Levy, just about a month before Dalí started work on the pavilion, show that he displayed the sculpture on a pedestal representing the fair's iconic architectural marvels, representing the world of tomorrow, the Trilon and the Perisphere. There, he represented these structures intended to be futuristic in their effect, as instead ruined and deteriorating. The exhibition catalog shows these structures being penetrated by a pair of disembodied arms, and I continue to be struck by how similar these arms are to the one depicted here in the mural on a figure that is likewise deteriorating and hollow. Are these the famously missing arms of the Venus de Milo, and might we interpret our disintegrating figure as a Venus as well? In the exhibition, which I hope you get a chance to visit today, we've put all of these works in conversation, the mural fragment, the sculpture, and this exhibition catalog. There are also direct references in the larger mural to iconography and paintings that Katrina has discussed. So in A Chemist Lifting with Extreme Precaution, the cuticle of a grand piano, we see the figure with a head of flowers, a motif taken up by Dalí in his fashion collaborations, both for fashion magazines and in a surrealist shop window he designed for Bonwit Teller. He also incorporated the burning giraffe, featured in Inventions of the Monsters. And generally, the artist René Magritte felt that he was the source of Dalí's uncanny burning objects, including giraffes. But we should also note that this image came up for Dalí in the screenplay that he wrote for the Marx Brothers, which he never realized, called Giraffes on Horseback Salad, and which incidentally also called for Harpo Marx to carry a butterfly net. This is Harpo with a surrealist harp that he received from Dalí after meeting him in Hollywood in 1937. So we could say that this mural not only advertises Dalí's more populist work in the realm of fashion, but also in Hollywood. The surrounding installation recalled the 1938 Surrealist exhibition in Paris, more generally, an exhibition of surrealism by surrealists, which had incorporated performance, sound, and even smell. You can see that Dalí's black umbrella seemed to refer to the artist Marcel Duchamp's intervention of coal bags hanging from the ceiling. And one of the many three-dimensional objects in the 1938 exhibition was Oscar Dominguez's piece titled Jamais, or Never, which combined a painted white Victrola with mannequin parts. Dominguez was a fellow Spanish surrealist, and you can see that Dalí has nearly faithfully reproduced this work here in the foreground. There was also a bed installed in the space of the 1938 exhibition, which leads the way to the slumbering burlesque performer that Dalí called for in his own space. And finally, in the rightmost section of the installation, situated in front of another classical arch that mirrors our own, a panel which is now lost, we see a three-dimensional recreation of a painting by René Magritte, a headless personage seated with a red drape, which reveals a bird cage holding two doves titled The Healer. So by reviving works by his surrealist peers in the group exhibition of 1938, Dalí gestured toward the original purpose of the Pavilion as Levy had conceived it, to portray surrealism as a movement and not the work of just one man, while at the same moment producing a comprehensive advertisement for himself as an artist and his own work. The Dream of Venus project was one of the primary ways that Dalí introduced himself to a broad public. Over the course of 2 years, some 44 million people attended the fair, and his signature style has largely come to define the term surrealism in the United States. But the compromises and failures that it entailed are also some of the primary reasons that our painting exists as a standalone painting today. And what we've conceived as the last of Dalí's disappearing acts of the 1930s, he left for France, as Caitlin mentioned, before the Pavilion opened, in frustration with the middlemen of culture, who required him to portray more normative concepts of female beauty than he would have preferred. And he wrote at length in this declaration of his profound belief in the American public's capacity to comprehend his unedited artistic intentions. But he lost authorial control, and by the second season, the presentation had undergone bankruptcy and had been retitled 20,000 Legs Under the Sea. I think this is a really poignant part of how we have to interpret our painting. I think as an artifact of the decade when the artist came into his own, or appeared as a singular artistic presence, but also necessarily disappeared or took a back seat due to his populism. So we're gratified to know now that this painting has reappeared in our galleries, where I think it now subtly incorporates the intersection of high and low culture that Dalí was so invested in exploring. So with that, we want to close by profoundly thanking all of the talented colleagues who have helped us to realize this exhibition. And we'd be so very grateful for your questions. And I believe there are going to be some microphones coming down the aisles. So please hold on asking your question until it can be amplified.
That was really wonderful, Jen, and also Katrina, Allison, beautiful presentations. As Jen said, we'd be very glad to take questions from the audience. If there are any, just put your hand up and we will find you. It looks like there's one up front. And here comes Miguel with a microphone.
Hi. I'm going to go back to the chemist lifting painting. And I think I've read that underneath the figure of Wagner, there's supposed to be not only a figure of Lenin, but also a figure of an image of the father and Wilhelm Tell. And for the life of me, I can't see it at all. I've looked and looked and looked, and I can't figure it out. So that would be helpful if I could see it.
Absolutely. So actually, Jen, there was just one right there on the left side. So what you're referring to is actually a composite figure. Mm-hmm. So it might be helpful just to actually name everything that we can see there. So in the title, we've got the chemist lifting. Yeah, sure, I'll do the pointer. We have I'll go this way. Here's the chemist, right, and the piano, of course. And here's Wagner. This figure here does some really interesting optical tricks. It morphs, right? So that one figure is identified by Dalí as himself, Lenin, his father. And there are, so many sort of father-son metaphors in William Tell that could be there also. But it's that one figure, which you'll also see in other paintings in the show, that is those personae combined. Yeah,
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? Oh, here we've got Miguel right back where you had been, in fact.
Thank you. This has been so interesting. I'm wondering if any of the physical pavilion is still anywhere.
Not that I'm aware of. I think at the end of the second season of the fair, it really was sort of demolished. Right? It was intended to be temporary, but you do see the large scale mural being divided into 6 sort of vertical individual paintings. And it's fascinating that, 4 of them ended up in one collection, right, in Hiroshima. And then our painting, was sold as a separate, distinct work under that title, Visions of Eternity, and dated a little bit earlier, 36. And then we have the other extreme of the mural, the far right-hand side, that has not been located. So that piece is, if it is extant, we don't know where it is.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
I
go
can
ahead.
add to that a little bit. Is my microphone on, by the way? Okay. So at the end of the fair, of course, Dalí left. He left the project in charge of Edward James. He really trusted his patron to respect his artistic intentions and to truly enforce them, which it appeared that he needed to in the context of all of these kind of compromises he was being called to make. There's a story in Julian Levy's memoir that relates there was a party upon the opening with all of the mermaids, and something happened there that allowed William Gardner, who was in charge of, he was the rubber manufacturer that produced all of the rubber kind of mermaid tails and all of the kind of various ephemera that were in the pavilion. So he's a big financial supporter. But whatever happened at this opening with Edward James and the mermaids allowed Gardner to extort him out of his primary ownership share of the
Dalí
company.
World's Fair.
Yeah, of DWF. And so what we know then, and our research on what happened around the demolition of the pavilion is ongoing. It probably will be for many years. But we know that at that point, Gardner would have been would have owned essentially everything that came out of it. So we're still seeking to find out what happened to all of the pieces and the path they took from there to here and Hiroshima.
Which is actually very fascinating, because when you read about the construction of the pavilion, Gardner and Dalí had very different agendas. Gardner wanted to use as much of this new type of molded rubber that he was producing to create actual mermaid tails and have all of these plastic elements. And Dalí is like, get out of here! I don't need any of these. So it is very ironic that he ends up having really control at the end.
And do we know if Dalí continued to get the 20% after they changed the name?
I don't know. That another ongoing research question. But to the other portion of this, he would have received the upfront sum of $2,500, but I don't think they actually would have made enough profit for him to get the 20% that he was supposed to receive. But that's somewhat speculative. We would need to actually do some research to understand the financials at the close of the fair.
Hi, so my question has to do of the separating of the Art Institute's piece from the rest of Dreams of Venus. Something that really struck me when you had the side-by-side was the vertical shrinkage. So I'm curious if was any evidence that you found of a sort of slicing away of the top of the portrait, because it just seems, or I guess at the bottom, odd to me that they would take away part of the image when they're separating it from the rest.
Yeah, the Chicago painting has been cut through on 3 sides, just cut through the paint. So it was clearly made smaller in the separation. I mean, we do wonder if the black part, behind the phonograph may have been more damaged, or if it just made a more sellable size of a painting. We don't really know. They took the effort to try to hide the fold line and restore that and fold that up, but it was clearly cut. So we haven't seen the Japanese paintings in person since we've made this discovery, so we still need to do kind of a physical comparison of condition. But that was one thing we noted when we started cleaning it, was there are nail holes on one side and the other 3 sides are all cut through and there's no tacking edges. What is this painting? This isn't really these aren't normal edges. And it was one of many little clues as we were kind of trying to figure out the puzzle. It was this painting has some strange things going on the surface that don't really relate to what you would see with a valued easel painting from the 1930s. So yeah, it was cut.
Just a little follow-up to that then too. It sounds like maybe it wasn't so common to do this slicing and dicing of paintings, which makes sense. No. Why would you do that?
I mean,
thankfully, yeah.
I mean, we would assume it was cut to make it into multiple Dalís that could be sold on the market. I mean, people do a lot of things to paintings too. I mean, people used to split, altarpieces and panels into multiple pieces. So we always
cut out Cezanne apples.
Yeah.
Right?
So it certainly seems to have been done later, probably to get more profit, but that's our guess.
Looks like we're right at 3, but if there's maybe 1 or 2 more questions, we can.
Actually, one more. Right
there.
Oh,
okay.
Hi, great presentation. I was just wondering, from what I've been led to believe in my class, that Dalí was later kicked out of the Surrealists. Why do we still look at Dalí as one of the greatest Surrealists of all time?
Do you want to talk about the excommunication, Jen?
I can talk about that. Also, as Caitlin and I work a lot on surrealism. Like I was saying in my presentation, he's really taken on somewhat of an aura, especially in the United States, because of his huge involvement in really kind of public events like the Dream of Venus, and in advertising, numerous kinds of things. To say he's the greatest surrealist, I'm not going to take the terms of that question and exactly reproduce them. However, he was, like you mentioned, expelled from the surrealist movement over a period of years, beginning in 1934 with a very theatrical expulsion in Paris, sort of a trial with the leader, André Breton, presiding. He showed up with a thermometer in his mouth, and it was an extremely, I would say, funny performance. It didn't truly take effect until 1939, and so that's the point at which you see him corresponding a lot less with publishing a lot less in surrealist journals and kind of participating less in that milieu. Surrealism has just been this remarkably generative concept, and people have taken it in so many different directions. So we have the purists, like Breton and his group. We have dissident surrealist groups like Bataille and people who took it and made it into something entirely under their own terminology and definition, like Dalí.
And that's actually, one of the themes that was of interest to us is, in the first gallery of the exhibition, you have, Dalí actually being fairly well behaved and adhering to a surrealism that would be a collective movement with Breton as its primary theorist and figurehead. And when he comes to the United States, Dalí can be himself, this surrealist movement of one. But it's really a question for us, how do we want to define surrealism today? Will we do it in a very strict sense of, adherence to a manifesto written in 1924 in Paris? Or are we going to let this elastic term grow and move into different geographies and, be expressed by many different people who self-identified as surrealists. And stay tuned, because in July we're doing an exhibition of Remedios Varo, which will sort of seem surrealist, but there's a question of her paintings. She was a contemporary of Dalí's, also originally from Spain, but paintings that she's making in Mexico City in the 50s and the 60s. To what extent is that surrealism or not?
Thank you.
There's a couple other raised hands back there and in the front. These are great. That area of the audience had so many questions.
I wondered if Dalí could be seen as maybe one of the artists that, was ostracized by the fascists in Spain and Germany. Are his works considered demented and all that? And what was his career a cry against fascism in a way?
Gosh, there is an area of the exhibition that does show Dalí responding to the Spanish Civil War and also, kind of having premonitions of the horrors that would become better known, the atrocities of World War II. But what's interesting is there's no, kind of visual outcry from Dalí in the way that you might think of Picasso's Guernica. Dalí's works sort of convey the mood and just the disquieting effects of the period in which he was living. But he's not the sort of artist who really takes a strong critical stance. I don't know, Jen, do you want to speak to that also, or?
Well, I'll just say that the exhibition really just takes up his work of the 1930s, and so it's our take on Dalí's approach to the Spanish Civil War is rather limited, and at this time it is very, I would say, ambiguous and entirely along the lines of our exhibition theme of appearance and disappearance. So, as soon as you start to kind of think, I think I can see a strong interpretation here, no, he pulls back, and he's, I think the best example of maybe his stance during this time period is the work Autumnal Cannibalism, which you can see on view in our exhibition, where you see a couple just like lovingly dining on one another. And so it's just a very conflicted kind of image of Spain at that moment.
There is always a sense that the ground is shifting, the political ground is shifting in his work. Okay, maybe, should we do one more, Miguel?
Yeah, one more is great. Thank you.
We've got a question from our very own Jill Bagajski. Yeah. I think there's a microphone coming to you, Jill, very quickly.
Hi, I'm just very curious about the what you've discovered about the ownership history of the Hiroshima panels and our panel, as you work back in time into the 1940s and such. What do you see about the way that the panels might have been separated and changing hands and, eventually ending up in a museum? So could you talk just a little bit about what you know about the provenance of our painting and the Hiroshima paintings?
I can give you maybe just a very unsatisfying answer. And I've reached out to the first owner, it appears that the Hiroshima panels were owned by some kind of fashion company or kind of maybe they were involved in merchandising at one point, and that's something that I'm still researching, but I've reached out to the previous owner before it ended up with them and have not gotten a response. I'm not going to call them out right now because I still would like a response. And so we're looking into potential parallels, but right now the provenance really does, extend from DWF, William Gardner, We have a gap between 1941 when the painting, the
Pavilion closes.
yeah,
right?
it was demolished apparently, and then we received the painting in 1987 from the Shapiros, a very famous family collecting surrealist art in Chicago. We know that they acquired it in 1966. We have a broad concept of the kind of group of galleries that we should be looking at, and we have done extensive research going through their archives. So far, nothing has come up, but stay tuned.
Well, and it does seem like, at least with our painting, it became available to the market in the early to mid 60s. As Jen's saying, we don't know exactly what gallery was selling it, but through the Shapiro's collecting, there is a sort of there aren't so many candidates. We're narrowing in. But thank you for that question. Okay, thank you, everybody.